9:17 p.m. A gurney crashed through the emergency room entrance. A young soldier struggling to breathe, fatigues torn apart, crimson streaming from an explosive wound. The state's finest critical care physician raced toward the operating table, then stopped dead. The soldier on that gurney was his own boy. He steadied his expression, seized a blade, and sliced open the ribcage. But when he located the shrapnel piece, positioned a whisper away from the beating muscle, his fingers started shaking. A single slip would end his child's life. And that's the moment she intervened. The inexperienced caregiver nobody paid attention to. The reserved woman everyone overlooked. "Sir," she murmured, "your fingers are trembling. Allow me to handle this." He barked, tone shattering. "You're merely a caregiver. How could you conceivably?" But she examined the revealed organ, the metal's position, and stated, "Halt. You're putting pressure on the pericardial border. The shrapnel will shift. Allow me to assume control." The physician's breathing fractured because she was correct. No standard caregiver should understand that. No standard caregiver should witness that. He retreated and permitted her to proceed. Moments later, she executed a stabilization technique only battlefield responders are trained to perform. She rescued his boy. When it concluded, he murmured, "Who are you, and why rescue him?" She glanced elsewhere. "I vowed to never discuss it. Before we start, take 2 seconds to comment. I'm watching," and hit subscribe. It truly keeps these stories alive and helps us make more for you. 9:17 p.m. The emergency entrance burst apart as a gurney barreled down the corridor, rubber shrieking, steel clattering, crimson dripping in a path behind it. Caregivers scattered aside. Attendants froze, and the critical response squad rushed into action. On the stretcher rested a young soldier, scarcely 19, khaki fatigue shredded by an explosive blast, ash covering half his torso, pieces of steel still burning within him. His gasps were rough, liquid, and faint, each one sounding like a dying motor attempting to ignite. Dr. Jonathan Reed, the state's premier critical care physician, ran toward the gurney with reckless velocity. He didn't stroll. He didn't trot. He bolted like a man racing mortality itself. Personnel whispered when he passed. He was the physician every medical center desired, the one they composed research articles about, the one who rescued individuals no one else could. But he stopped the instant his gaze landed on the casualty. The soldier on the gurney was his boy. For a split moment, existence stopped moving. The sirens didn't register. The crowd didn't register. The crimson dripping off the stretcher didn't register. Only one thought existed. Not him. Please, heaven. Not him. But Dr. Reed masked the terror boiling within him. Years of preparation welded his expression into a mask of composure. He grabbed the gurney rail, forced his tone steady, and bellowed commands with surgical authority that barely concealed the tremor underneath. "Prepare the operating room. I demand complete trauma procedure immediately." They rushed into the critical bay. Screens flashed scarlet. Caregivers loaded tubes. An anesthesiologist positioned a mask over the soldier's face, but the numbers still dropped. His boy's pulse was slowing, his circulation pressure falling. Every moment was a stolen gasp. Dr. Reed's fingers moved quickly, too quickly, grabbing a blade, cutting open the scorched material around the ribcage to reveal the injury. The flesh was charred, the bones bruised from shockwave force. And deeper, far deeper, he witnessed the nightmare. An explosive piece embedded near the organ's surface. Too near, much too near. His fingers started shaking, and not a minor tremor. His digits quivered so violently, the blade's edge tapped the steel tray. Perspiration broke across his brow. His throat constricted. Images flashed through his consciousness. His boy, at 5 years old, holding a wooden blade. His boy laughing through basic training graduation. His boy embracing him farewell before assignment. He blinked the recollections away, but the tremor intensified. 1 incorrect angle, 1 incorrect move, 1 millimeter too deep, and his only offspring would perish on his table. A caregiver whispered, "Doctor, your fingers?" I'm adequate," he snapped, but the fracture in his tone betrayed him. He wasn't adequate. He was shattering. And that's when somebody stepped forward. Somebody the squad barely noticed. Somebody who blended into corners and darkness. Somebody everyone talked over. The inexperienced caregiver. The reserved woman no one ever remembered. Sophie Bennett. She stood at the opposite side of the table, her auburn hair tied back neatly, navy scrubs clean, gaze calm in a space drowning in panic. She didn't elevate her tone. She didn't hurry. She simply walked nearer and stated softly, "Sir, halt. Your fingers are trembling. Allow me to handle this." Every head turned. Dr. Reed. Reed's gaze snapped toward her, crimson-rimmed, wild with terror and protective impulse. "You're merely a caregiver," he stated, tone cracking. "You can't conceivably." Sophie didn't argue. She looked directly at the revealed ribcage, at the trajectory of the metal, at the angle of pressure building around the organ. Her tone didn't shake. It didn't hesitate. "Halt. You're putting pressure on the pericardial border. The shrapnel will shift. Allow me to assume control." The space froze because she didn't speak like an inexperienced person. She didn't speak like somebody guessing. She spoke like somebody who had executed this before, under gunfire. Dr. Reed felt his breathing leave him. She was correct. Absolutely correct. No standard caregiver should understand that. No training curriculum even taught that. The technique she just described wasn't in textbooks. She shouldn't comprehend what she comprehended. Sophie's gaze met his steady, unwavering, quietly certain. "Please," she murmured, "allow me to rescue him." The physician felt something within him collapse. His boy was perishing. His fingers weren't obeying him. His sight blurred at the borders. He couldn't lose him. Not like this. So, Dr. Reed retreated. He didn't grant her authorization in words. He simply moved aside. Sophie slid into position with a calmness that didn't match her years or rank. She reached into the injury with precise fingertips, stabilizing the metal using a maneuver only battlefield responders used in war zones. Her fingers were steady, her breathing slow, her concentration absolute. Screens spiked, circulation pressure climbed. The surgical personnel stared as the impossible unfolded. The inexperienced caregiver nobody knew was executing a life-saving technique nobody in the medical center had witnessed. And within moments, she brought the soldier back. His pulse strengthened. His oxygen readings rose. The bleeding slowed. Sophie eased her fingers back and stepped aside. The space erupted into stunned murmurs. Dr. Reed moved forward, moisture blurring his sight for the second occasion that evening. His boy was breathing because of her. When the final stitch was positioned and the young man wheeled out for stabilization, he turned to her. "Who are you?" he murmured, tone shaking. "And why rescue my boy?" Sophie glanced elsewhere, gaze dimming with something ancient, something agonizing. I vowed to never discuss it. Before he could speak again, a technician burst into the space, expression pale. "Doctor, there's something you must see. We discovered something unusual in the soldier's equipment." Dr. Reed stepped forward. "What is it?" The technician swallowed hard. It wasn't a standard explosive. Sophie's gaze snapped up and the space turned silent as granite because she recognized that expression. She had witnessed it before long ago in a location she wished she had perished in. The technician opened his palm. Inside was a steel piece with markings she never thought she'd witness again. Her breathing stopped. Her history wasn't just returning. It had followed her into the medical center, and it wasn't finished with her yet. The recovery section was silent, but not the peaceful variety. This silence had tension in it, like the barriers were holding their breath. The soldier rested in the intensive care bed, hooked to carefully measured tubes, vitals stabilizing thanks to the fingers of the woman nobody could explain. The physician, Dr. Nathan Cross, stood at the foot of the bed, arms crossed tight enough to ache, gaze glued to the boy he almost lost. He replayed the instant over and over in his consciousness. The trembling blade, the metal pulsing dangerously near to the organ, and then the murmur he never saw coming. "Halt! You're putting pressure on the pericardial border. No inexperienced caregiver should have been capable of reading and revealed ribcage like that. No inexperienced caregiver should comprehend a stabilization technique only field responders learn under gunfire." So he waited outside Sophie's assigned supply space, leaning against the barrier. When she finally walked out, he didn't speak. He just stared. She froze too, like she'd anticipated this confrontation eventually. Her auburn hair was tied back, her scrub still stained from the procedure. She held a tray of supplies like she desired it to act as a shield. "I require answers," Dr. Cross stated quietly. "I already provided one," she murmured. "I vowed to never discuss the remainder." He stepped nearer. "You rescued my boy. I owe you my entire existence, but no caregiver, inexperienced or otherwise, should have been capable of pulling that metal out without causing ventricular collapse. That's something I've only witnessed in deployed squads." Sophie blinked slowly, her jaw tightening, but she didn't respond. He exhaled sharply. "Just tell me this. How did you comprehend what to execute?" She swallowed. "Experience." "What? Variety of experience?" The silence was heavy enough to shatter rib cages. She finally looked him directly in the gaze. "The variety you spend the remainder of your existence attempting to forget." Before he could speak, alarms erupted down the corridor. An intensive care code alert. Dr. Cross sprinted toward the sound. Sophie didn't even hesitate to follow. The caregivers in the section were in chaos when they arrived. 2 personnel members tried stabilizing a different casualty, a military instructor brought in earlier from the same explosive incident, but something about the scene felt incorrect. The casualty wasn't crashing because of trauma. He was crashing because his intravenous bag had been swapped. Sophie witnessed it first. Her gaze narrowed. She moved around the bed with sharp, trained footsteps that didn't belong to any standard caregiver. She checked the label, sniffed the tube, felt the temperature of the drip with the back of her glove. "Halt the infusion," she stated sharply. The young resident hesitated. "But the documentation." Sophie grabbed the clamp and snapped the intravenous tube shut herself. Dr. Cross stared at her. "What are you witnessing?" she answered without looking at him. "This isn't lactated solution." Somebody switched it. "He's being chemically slowed." "Slowed?" the resident asked. Sophie nodded once, to mimic shock, to make it appear like the explosion caused more damage. The space fell into sudden suffocating silence. Somebody had tampered with the supplies again. Sophie studied the casualty with rapid practiced maneuvers. Pressure adjustments, airway positioning, circulatory boosts, moves so efficient the other caregivers retreated and just watched. She worked like somebody who had executed this in dirt, in sand, under gunfire, in darkness, not somebody who learned it under fluorescent illumination. When the casualty's vitals stabilized, Dr. Cross pulled her aside. "Sophie," he murmured, "this wasn't an accident." "I comprehend. Is this connected to the explosive mishap?" Her jaw flexed, but she stated nothing. He leaned in. "Is this connected to you?" Her pulse quickened. "I didn't desire this following me here." Dr. Cross felt something cold crawl up his spine. "What did you flee from?" But before she could answer, 2 military police officers walked through the intensive care entrance. Their presence was heavy, authoritative, too intentional to be coincidence. Caregivers froze, residents retreated. One of the officers approached Dr. Cross. "Sir, we must secure the casualty from the training accident." The soldier. Dr. Cross's stomach dropped. "He's recovering. What's occurring?" We're reviewing all evidence regarding the explosion, the officer replied. The pieces recovered don't match standard issue explosives. Sophie's crimson ran cold. Meaning? Dr. Cross asked. Meaning somebody swapped training equipment with inferior foreign imports. Sophie closed her gaze. Inferior foreign imports. Inexpensive steel. The variety used by insurgents in the Middle Eastern conflict. The variety her former squad encountered the day they were eliminated. The variety she survived alone. Dr. Cross witnessed the colour drain from her expression. Sophie, how do you comprehend that expression? She didn't answer, but the officer noticed her expression too. Ma'am, you adequate? Sophie forced her posture straight, just exhausted. But the officer wasn't convinced. He studied her expression, her movements, the posture of somebody who'd witnessed these weapons before. You were there during the procedure, correct? You helped stabilize the young soldier. She nodded carefully. Then, we'll require your statement too. Dr. Cross stepped in front of her. She's not cleared for interrogation right now. It's routine, the officer assured. We just must comprehend if the injury pattern matches intentional tampering. Sophie's breathing caught. Intentional tampering. This was no training accident. This was sabotage. And she recognized the signature, but she remained silent. She wasn't supposed to reveal anything. She wasn't supposed to exist. She wasn't supposed to still be breathing. Dr. Cross noticed the tremor in her palm. That was new. That wasn't inexperienced terror. That was recollection. He lowered his tone. Sophie, this is connected to your history, isn't it? She stared at the floor. My squad discovered the truth too late, she murmured. They didn't survive. And now it's occurring again, he asked. She lifted her gaze to his. Yes. Before he could respond, a loud gasp came from behind them. The soldier, Dr. Cross's boy, had awakened. His digits twitched, his gaze fluttered open. Dad, he murmured. Dr. Cross rushed to the bedside, moisture flooding his sight. I'm here, boy. Thank heaven, I'm here. The soldier swallowed hard. Where? Where is she? The caregiver, the one who rescued me. Dr. Cross stepped aside so he could witness Sophie. But the instant the soldier looked at her, really looked, his expression changed completely. His breathing hitched, gaze widening in disbelief. He wasn't just grateful. He was shocked. He stared at the small constellation tattoo behind her ear, barely visible beneath her hair. Ma'am, he murmured, tone trembling. Is that you? Sophie froze. He recognized her. From where? From when? From what? Dr. Cross looked between them, pulse pounding. What's occurring? How do you comprehend her? The soldier swallowed, tone shattering. Because that tattoo belonged to the battlefield responder who rescued my squad years ago. The one who dragged 3 injured soldiers out under gunfire. The one who vanished. The one they all stated perished in the desert. Sophie's pulse stopped cold. Dr. Cross murmured, Sophie, who are you? She opened her mouth, but the intensive care entrance burst open again. 2 more officers stepped inside. We must talk to the caregiver now. Sophie exhaled slowly, and for the first occasion tonight. She was finished fleeing. If you think nobody should ever judge a reserved individual too quickly, comment, never judge. The intensive care corridor felt like a battlefield Sophie had already survived once before. Sterile white barriers, the hum of equipment, physicians rushing past like panicked soldiers attempting to maintain order in chaos. But inside space 412, existence moved differently, slower, heavier. The young soldier rested in a monitored recovery space, ribcage heavily bandaged, oxygen tube taped near his cheek, every rise of his breathing. A silent victory. His father, the state's premier critical care physician, stood at the foot of the bed, shoulders rigid, gaze locked on the young man he almost lost. The surgical mask hung loose around his neck, wrinkled, forgotten. He hadn't spoken since Sophie finished the procedure. He hadn't taken his gaze off his boy either. Sophie hovered by the screens, checking oxygen saturation, adjusting the intravenous at the slowest conceivable rate, pretending she didn't feel the physician studying her every move. He finally spoke. "That maneuver you executed, nobody outside forward deployed responders even attempts it. You manipulated the metal mid-conduction. If you slip by a millimeter, I comprehend," she stated quietly. "How?" His tone cracked. "How did you comprehend what to execute when even I—" He swallowed hard, emotion constricting his throat. "I couldn't maintain my fingers steady." Sophie didn't answer, not because she didn't desire to, but because she couldn't. Not without reopening entrances she'd sealed shut years ago. She adjusted the solution drip instead. He exhaled, frustrated, battling the urge to press her for answers. He had just witnessed a miracle in the palm of her fingers, and the individual who executed it refused to explain. But then the soldier stirred, his eyelashes fluttered, lids twitching as if he were battling through heavy sedation. Sophie paused. The physician stepped nearer, gripping the rail. "Boy," he murmured. The soldier's gaze opened halfway, hazy, unfocused, but breathing. His gaze drifted slowly from his father to Sophie, and then it froze. His breathing hitched, his digits twitched toward her weakly, the pulse screen spiking slightly. Sophie stiffened. She'd witnessed that expression before, not recognition of her expression, but of the history she carried like a wound. He squinted, his tone barely a murmur. You were there." Sophie's pulse thudded. "Don't speak. You must rest." But the soldier shook his head. "The constellation," he breathed out. "The tattoo on your neck." His tone trembled. "I've witnessed it before." Sophie instinctively reached for the collar of her scrub top, but the neckline already revealed the small faded constellation etched into her flesh. The mark only soldiers from her former squad knew about. The one used in the desert to identify responders when radios went down. His father looked between them. Confusion, terror, realization. What tattoo? What is he discussing? But Sophie retreated slowly, like she was retreating into darkness. She felt exposed, as if the entire space had been torn open, and the history she'd buried was marching straight toward her. The soldier blinked through the fog, focusing harder. "You rescued us in Basra years ago." "I remember." His tone thinned. "You weren't supposed to be breathing." Sophie tried to steady her breathing. Recollection slammed into her like shrapnel. Sandstorms, explosions, screaming radios, fire-blackened evening skies, her squad burning, her fingers covered in crimson that wasn't hers. The instant she realized she was the only one remaining, his father stared at her. "My boy's tour in the desert was confidential. Nobody outside the special squads comprehend those locations." His gaze narrowed, tone shaking. "Who are you, Sophie?" She glanced elsewhere. "Just a caregiver," she murmured. But the soldier wasn't finished. His tone cracked as he forced the words out. "The explosive today. It wasn't correct." He grabbed his father's wrist weakly. It wasn't standard issue. The steel, the weight. Something was incorrect. Sophie's gaze snapped back to him. "What do you mean, incorrect?" "It didn't sound like our explosives," he murmured, wincing at the agony. "We've been complaining about inferior quality equipment for months. Faulty clips, defective detonators, inexpensive steel. And today, his throat constricted. One finally detonated the incorrect direction." Sophie's stomach sank. This wasn't an accident. Somebody was cutting corners on military supply chains. Somebody was making currency off defective equipment that was killing soldiers. The physician's expression hardened. He clenched the bed rail until his knuckles turned white. "Who's your supplier? Who approved the shipment?" The soldier swallowed Patterson Industries. Sophie froze. She comprehended that name. Everyone in her former squad did. They weren't just a supplier. They were notorious for corruption investigations swept quietly under the rug, millions stolen, faulty armor shipped overseas, and soldiers perishing because of it. The physician's expression torn between rage and disbelief. If they sent defective explosives, if that's what injured my boy. His jaw locked as he realized the truth. Somebody is going to pay for this. Sophie stepped to the bedside, gently pulling the blanket higher over the soldier's ribcage, but his gaze never left hers. "You rescued me twice," he murmured. "Once in the desert, once tonight." A lump formed in Sophie's throat. She retreated because if she stayed too near, her history would swallow her whole. She turned toward the entrance. "You both require rest," she stated softly, but the physician blocked her trajectory. Not aggressively, desperately. "If you comprehend something about what occurred overseas, if you comprehend why my boy was almost killed again," she shook her head. "I vowed never to discuss it." His shoulders fell in helpless frustration. "Sophie, please." Her gaze softened, but her answer didn't. "Some things are better left buried." She turned again, but a sharp metallic clatter echoed from the corridor. A sound too deliberate to be random. Sophie's instincts flared instantly. Battlefield instincts, the variety she never unlearned. The soldier heard it too. His gaze widened. "That sound, that's an arming lever." Sophie spun toward the entrance, pulse pounding. Somebody was here. Somebody who didn't desire him awake. Somebody who might be connected to the inferior explosives. The corruption, the blast. She reached for the intensive care entrance window, peeking through the narrow slit. And there, half hidden behind a rolling crash cart, stood a man in scrubs that weren't medical center issue, holding something metallic in his gloved palm. The same variety of steel she witnessed embedded in the soldier's ribcage. Her entire body went cold. The assassin wasn't finished. He had come back to finish the task, and Sophie was standing between him and the only survivor who could expose everything. The entrance knob rattled, and the illumination above the intensive care suddenly flickered. Sophie murmured one word under her breathing. "No." As the entrance slowly started to open, the sun had barely risen when the investigator walked into the physician's office, holding a plastic evidence bag. Inside it, glinting under fluorescent illumination, was a steel shard identical to the one pulled from his boy's ribcage. Only this one wasn't covered in crimson. It was untouched, clean, and it had no legitimate manufacturing stamp. The physician stood frozen, arms crossed, holding his breathing as the investigator stated, "You were correct. These weren't standard issue pieces. Somebody sold counterfeit explosives to the installation." The physician swallowed hard. "Who?" The investigator hesitated. "Somebody high up. Somebody who didn't think anyone would discover it out until your caregiver intervened." The physician's gaze flicked toward the intensive care corridor, where the inexperienced caregiver was quietly adjusting an intravenous bag. Her auburn hair tied back, her posture straight but subdued. She didn't glance up. She didn't require to. She always felt when individuals were staring. And today, she felt the weight of the entire medical center pressing on her shoulders. The soldier, the physician's boy, had been awake for an hour, battling past grogginess, demanding to witness the woman who rescued his existence. He kept stating the same thing over and over. She had a small constellation tattoo on her neck. I comprehend her. I swear I comprehend her." The physician didn't understand. How could his boy recognize a caregiver nobody had met until last evening? But the soldier's insistence never wavered. "She was at the desert," he stated quietly, tone trembling. "I witnessed her once. The responder, they stated, perished in the blast." The physician froze. "Are you absolutely certain?" The soldier nodded. "Dad, they stated she perished, but I witnessed her kneel next to a burning vehicle with a constellation tattoo on her neck, attempting to maintain another soldier breathing. That tattoo." He pressed a shaking palm to his ribcage. "I'll never forget it." The physician stepped out of the space, pulse pounding. He required answers, not suspicions, not rumors, not pieces of recollection. Real answers. He walked toward the reserved caregiver, standing at the supply space counter. She sensed him long before he arrived and maintained her gaze on the drawer labels. "I thought I told you I'm just here to help your boy recover," she murmured. "No more questions." but the physician's patience had already evaporated. "My boy recognized you," he stated softly. She froze. Her palm tightened around a stack of gauze packets. "He stated you were there," the physician continued. "He stated you were the responder they claimed perished." He witnessed the tattoo, slowly. Agonizingly, she turned her head. "You weren't supposed to witness that." "Why hide it?" he asked. "Why vanish?" Her gaze glimmered with ghosts she hadn't invited. "Because surviving that day ruined more than perishing ever could." Before he could respond, the investigator rushed toward them, breathless. "We must go," he stated urgently. "Now," the physician stiffened. "Why?" "The supplier," the investigator stated, "the man who sold counterfeit explosives to the soldiers. He's attempting to flee the state." The reserved caregiver exhaled sharply. "Location." The investigator blinked. You desire to come?" She pulled her badge from her pocket and positioned it on the counter. "I'm not here as a caregiver." The physician stared. The investigator stared. But the reserved caregiver didn't flinch. "You desire him caught," she stated calmly. "Then you're going to require somebody who comprehends how he moves." Within minutes, the three of them, physician, investigator, and the woman everyone believed was an ordinary, inexperienced caregiver, sat inside a government sedan, speeding through the early morning traffic. The atmosphere was thick with tension. The physician finally asked, "If you don't mind, what exactly were you over there in the desert?" She didn't break eye contact with the road ahead. "A battlefield responder," she stated quietly. "Classified squad. Our team responded to black signal emergencies, the variety nobody reports." The investigator leaned forward. "How did you survive the attack that killed your squad?" She blinked once. "Luck and guilt." The vehicle fell silent again. They arrived at a storage facility just outside the city. 2 black vehicles were already waiting, agents positioned behind concrete barriers. The suspect, a middle-aged man in an expensive grey jacket, was pacing in front of a steel locker, stuffing documents into a duffel bag. The investigator murmured, "That's him." The physician swallowed hard. "That man nearly killed my boy." The reserved caregiver stepped out of the vehicle, palms raised. "Don't move." The man jerked around, grabbed a pistol, aimed. Agents drew their weapons. The physician pressed himself behind a barricade, pulse pounding. But she didn't move. She walked toward the suspect, slowly, calmly, like she'd executed this 100 occasions before. The suspect shouted, "Stay back." She didn't halt. "Your explosive was poorly assembled," she stated softly. "Fuse rotation was uneven. Piece chamber unbalanced. That's why it detonated early." The man faltered, shocked. She comprehended the technicals. She stepped nearer. "And that's why you're going to prison for killing soldiers to save a few dollars." The suspect flinched, lowered his weapon, and agents swarmed him, slamming him to the ground. The physician felt his knees weaken. The investigator exhaled in disbelief, and the reserved caregiver simply retreated, her expression unreadable. Hours later, back at the medical center, the soldier sat upright in bed as she walked in. His gaze widened instantly. "You," he murmured. "You were there that day." She lowered her gaze. "You weren't supposed to recognize me." He shook his head, smiling weakly. "How could I forget the responder who dragged me out of the flames? They stated you didn't make it." She swallowed hard. "I didn't desire to be discovered." "Why?" he asked softly. She looked at the floor. "Because surviving when everyone else didn't aches more than anything they could have executed to me." He reached out, his palm trembling. "Then allow me to state something nobody got to state to you." She lifted her gaze slowly, fearfully. "Thank you," he murmured, "for rescuing me twice." The physician stood at the entrance, wiping moisture from his cheek. "Miss," he stated gently, "whatever you were before, whatever you survived, I just desire you to comprehend you're not alone anymore." She offered the faintest smile. Small, uncertain, but real. As she turned to depart, the soldier called after her, stopping her at the doorway. He took a shaky breathing. "I don't comprehend what the future looks like, but I desire you in mine." Her pulse stuttered. Moisture filled her gaze, but she maintained walking, reserved, steady, hiding the tremor in her ribcage. "And if you're still here, listening to this instant, please, I'm asking you from the bottom of my pulse, don't depart without subscribing. Your support is the one thing that maintains these stories breathing,